All right, I can finally take requests. So I am here to see if anybody wants to talk about moral realism and whether there are objective moral truths. So if you don't agree with this, hop on the live and let me know. All right, hey, what's up? How's it going? So this is the first time I'm on my own on here. I was on Danny's TikTok yesterday, but I am here and I could finally take requests. So if anybody wants to pop up onto the stage, request, and talk about moral realism, you're welcome to do so. I'm not going to be real picky about the topic because I'm probably not going to get a lot of viewers because I'm just starting out. So if you do want to come up here, do let me know. So we'll just wait and see if we get a request. It probably takes quite a few people before you get consistent number of requests. I'm not opposition. No, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I think it went okay on Danny's live. I tried. I just need to be chill when there's lots of comments and. Oh right, cool. People are sharing the live. Awesome, 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 awesome. Okay, so we will wait and see. So if you do want to come up and talk to me, I can take requests now. So if anybody's interested in talking about moral realism, feel free. If you want to ask me other questions or whatever, we'll do that for now. Once I start getting more consistent requests, specifically in the topics that I've got, up there, then I'll probably sort of, be more restrictive. So we'll just have to wait and see if anybody wants to talk about realism. Hopefully somebody will show up. You know what I should do for the first few of these is I should find somebody in advance that wants to talk about this stuff and then bring them up there. I could also let everybody know in my Discord. So for anybody, I don't know if the first time viewers, my name is Lance Bush. I'm a philosopher and psychologist. I got a PhD in psychology, master's in philosophy. I do work in the psychology of metaethics, and I also do experimental philosophy and moral psychology. So I do research on how people think about the nature of morality, and also moral psychology more generally, moral judgment, moral behavior, that sort of thing. A big interest of mine is the sort of methods behind this kind of research. So I'm really interested in making sure the methods actually, work. There are huge problems in psychology right now. Some people may be aware of this replication crisis. One of the hallmarks of good science is if you run a study and you get a certain type of result, if you run as similar of a study as you can manage, of course, you can't run exactly the same study, you don't have a time machine. Hopefully you get similar results. And if you don't, that might mean that your first study, that the results are not reliable, they're not stable, you might have had a false positive. So problem in psychology is a lot of studies aren't replicating. So that's a big issue. But my big concern is measurement. The tools we use in psychology, it's not like a thermometer or something else where there's a pretty concrete physical mechanism that can account for why it's a good measure of whatever it is it's a good measure of. In psychology, you're dealing with, basically invisible variables, and measurement, I think, is taken for granted, and it's often, not not great in psychology. So that's a big interest of mine. Okay, I do see. Cool. So somebody requested. So let's bring them up. First are my official first request I've ever had on here. So that's kind of awesome. All right. Let's see. I don't see you up here yet. It's like idling. So I don't know if there's. I shared with a moral realist. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Hey, I can hear you. Welcome, welcome.
All right,
All
cool.
right. So, what do you want to talk about? Did you want to talk about metaethics or something else?
No, I disagree with the writing in the topic.
Cool. Okay. So, please say more.
Okay, so this is my premise. Basically, objective truth is connected to reality. If I don't go to work, if let's say I tell myself the truth is I don't go to work, but I'll still make money. That isn't true. Objective reality would say, and we can tell reality by the circumstances of the majority that do it.
Okay. So the statement that I have is specifically about moral truth, not truth in general.
Oh,
Are you?
okay. Sorry. Yeah, then never mind. All right. I thought,
Oh, okay.
yeah, never mind then. Okay. Bye. Uh,
Oh, okay. No problem. Sorry if that wasn't clear. Yeah. Note the moral part. Maybe that was invisible. No worries. All right. Let's go through the comments and if anybody wants to request and wants to talk about whether there. So the topic, the official topic is there is no objective moral truth. I am pretty new at this. This is literally my first time doing this where I could take requests. So I might not get a lot of them, which means I'll be more flexible with other topics. But let me look in the comments. I got a hello, Lance. Thanks. What's the difference between realism and physicalism? So depends what you like. So realism is a very general category. You could be a realist about various types of topics. So you can be a realist about mathematics or about morality or about aesthetic value or whatever. So there's different types of realism, and even there's even like subcategories within those. So like within realism, there's naturalist and non-naturalist accounts of realism, and then those can be further subdivided. So realism is a super general category. Physicalism is a specific thesis in metaphysics, which says that basically everything is physical. Is physicalism naturalism? That's a good question. I mean, these days I don't think anybody knows what naturalism is. I would think that physicalism, I wouldn't call, is physicalism naturalism? Well, I mean, they're not the same thing. So if you're asking, like, is physicalism and naturalism the same thing or synonymous with one another, then no. But is it like physicalism, like someone's a physicalist, they're probably a naturalist, but I don't know that they're like one of them like entails the other or requires the other. Maybe they could come apart. You know, there's philosophers will always draw distinctions where other people might not draw them. So maybe there's a physicalist that's. I would think if someone's a physicalist, then they're going to be a naturalist. But a naturalist, probably do they have to be a physicalist? Probably not. You know, you could be a naturalist, but not. You might take specific issues with physicalism. So you might think the world is natural, but it's not physical. I don't know. I would want to see like what the literature on that says. I don't really study these categories and distinctions to the level of detail where I'd be able to say, here's a person that calls themselves this thing but not that thing. I would be surprised if there weren't people that would call themselves one but not the other in both directions. Although it might be that the majority of philosophers wouldn't be too comfortable with, certain sorts of divisions or distinctions. Is error theory objectivism or non-objectivism? It's a type of non-objectivism. So error theory and metaethics is a conjunction of claims. It's like a set of claims. And it goes something like this. First, moral claims are propositions. They purport to say something that's true or false. Second, they attempt to describe an objective moral reality. So they refer to stance-independent moral facts. And then the third claim is that there are no facts like that. And so as a result, all of these moral claims are false. So basically you have, okay, so moral claims, they're trying to say something true or false. The specific thing they're saying is true or false is a reference to this objective moral reality. So it's a metaphysical thesis in that respect. And then the third is simply that metaphysical thesis is wrong. This is basically what error theorists are saying is, hey, when people go around saying things like stealing is wrong or hurting people is wrong, they are trying to refer to these like objective moral properties or facts out there, but there isn't anything like that. So those claims are false. It's very similar to if someone went around saying things about like unicorn ecology. So they said stuff like unicorns love to eat cupcakes. Unicorns don't really like carrots. Now, all of those claims would be false because unicorns don't exist. And so each one of those claims, like unicorns like cupcakes, that implicitly presupposes that there are unicorns and that they have preferences. But if there are no unicorns, then the statement is false. And so the idea behind error theory is that moral claims contain false presuppositions. Now, typically, the most conventional form of error theory comes from J.L. Mackie. And Mackie's is based on this idea that the false presupposition is a metaphysical claim, that moral claims attempt to refer to objective moral facts, but there aren't any facts of that kind. And so those claims are systematically false. But you could make an error theory. There could be other types of metaethical views that are error theories, but the error is something else. So for instance, here's another possible error theory. You could say all moral claims presuppose that people have free will, people don't have free will, so all moral claims are false. Something like that. Could be something else. You could say all moral claims presuppose God exists, God doesn't exist, therefore all the claims are false. So yeah, that's really what it is. It's a type of non-objectivism or anti-realism. I mean, non-objectivism is a perfectly fine way to put it. Objectivism, non-objectivism. Typically in the literature these days, it's realism, anti-realism is the terms people tend to use. All right. Somebody says 99% of the guests will be Christian people thinking divine command theory isn't non-objectivism. It's a tough case. I tend to think of divine command theory the way it typically sounds to me. It sounds like a type of anti-realism because it sounds like the moral facts are stance dependent, but that's probably something that proponents of divine command theory, at least some of them, would dispute. All right. Wow, we got quite a decent number of viewers here. I didn't expect so many. I fell for your April Fool's post for half a second, haha. So one of the things that I guess is like, I don't know, it's not a common position in academic philosophy, is that I think that certain types of views that are held by non-naturalist moral realists are literally meaningless. Like, I don't think they're false, I think they're actually meaningless. So what are some examples? The main one is irreducible normativity, but I also think a lot of the terminology that they use in certain technical and philosophical contexts, like their use of normative reasons, these are all technical terms. I don't think that the technical terms really connect with or can be meaningfully integrated with the rest of our vocabulary in a meaningful way. I think that they don't mean anything. It'd be like if I made up a word. I think the words are, I mean, obviously the words are made up because they're technical terms, or they're analogs to, or it's like taking some word that already has a meaning in everyday language and then using it in a different context. But in that different context, its use is now, I think, it's meaningless in that context. So, the main one is irreducible normativity. So I think that there are descriptive facts. There's facts about like what is the case. They describe what the world is like. Now, many philosophers, might even be the majority, also think that there are facts about what's good or bad, or what one should or shouldn't do. And they think that those facts cannot be reduced or redescribed in descriptive terms. They are not descriptive facts. So a fact like you shouldn't steal, or pain is bad, those are not descriptive claims. Well, I mean, the second one you could call it descriptive, but it's an evaluative claim. So it's irreducibly normative. These are normative or evaluative claims, and they are ultimately not descriptive claims. They're claims that are purporting to tell you something about the positive or negative valence of things, or what one should or shouldn't do. And I'm restricting the terminology here, but there's a variety of other normative terminology that may be irreducible. And like technically, like certain sorts of prescriptive normative claims, you could call them like the deontic side. Those can be conceptually distinguished from the evaluative ones. I don't want to overcomplicate things, so let's just stick with should and shouldn't. Okay, so a lot of philosophers think that there are facts like you shouldn't do this, and that kind of fact cannot be redescribed or understood in purely descriptive terms. It just is a normative term, and it's true, and it can't be described. I mean, I'm saying the same thing again, but like, what does that mean? I don't think it's meaningful. And so I think this idea of irreducible normativity is literally nonsense. Anyway, I did a post on April Fool's a couple days ago, basically saying, I sat down, I had this long conversation, and I finally understood what it meant. So just messing with people. Now, a lot of philosophers, most of them would have no idea that I think this, or said like, I don't know, they don't know who I am. But the few that have, people have said, hey, there's this guy Lance, he says this, what do you think about that? Have been pretty dismissive. It hasn't been taken seriously as a position, but I think it's right. And so, I endorse this pretty unusual position on the matter. All right. So Jerome asks, do you think if moral realism were true, there would be a motivating factor to follow it? I don't think there's a fact of the matter about that. So, I mean, it's a matter of stipulation. If a type of moral realism that by stipulation contained a motivational component were true, would it contain it? Yes. If it didn't, it wouldn't. So it's really just going to depend on what you're stipulating you mean by moral realism. So I don't think there's like a fact of the matter about the correct account of moral realism. It's just a question of what the person is proposing. And then it would just be a question of whether that motivational component, like if there was such a thing, so So it's a little challenging to address the question like, if it were true, would it have a motivating component? If one with a motivating component were true, then it would. If it didn't have that as part of the concept, then it wouldn't. Okay. Oh, I see a couple guest requests. So let me take a look at those, and I'll try to get back to the chat. I see two people here, and I can't tell what order they came in. So I'm just going to pick one randomly. All right, and sorry if that was a while ago because I was looking through the chat. Hi, Steph.
Yeah, good morning. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing well.
Yeah, that's good. Now, context. I have had this live shared with me, so I actually haven't seen any of your videos before, but I really like the statement that you had above, and I would love to expand on that if you've got the time.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so moral is one example of a system that we put in place to live by, whether that be received from each other, received from some sort of divine figure, received from a text, history, etc. There are other systems in place. Honor, justice, mercy, ethics, which can have overlapping areas of moral, but don't always necessarily. How do you feel about those?
How do I feel about these other areas?
Yeah, so you've addressed morals specifically,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a reason behind that, though I haven't heard enough to figure that out yet. But what about any of the other human constructs that we bring in to form a system of living?
So if if we're talking about things like institutions, and like, because you're the way you're framing it, it sounds like stuff I totally do think that there is. So when I deny that there's objective moral truth, I'm denying specific theses that are put forward by philosophers. So there's philosophers that think that there are facts about what's morally right or wrong that are true independent of any standards or values that any individuals or groups hold. And I'm specifically denying that. But I do think that morality exists. Often when you say you're a moral anti-realist, which is what I am, people will think that that means that you don't think morality exists, or you don't think morality is useful, or you don't think that we have or should have moral norms and institutions as a society. But I don't think any of those things. I do think morality exists, but it's just that what I don't think it is this like set of objective facts that are true and authoritative, independent of anybody's values. I do think that we build moral systems, we construct moral systems, and they're extremely useful. They're quite fantastic. We as societies structure and mutually hold one another accountable with respect to standards of and normative systems, and those can be incredibly valuable. Now, they don't always. They're not always. I mean, there have been societies that have constructed really horrible moral systems. They've justified all sorts of heinous and terrible things, and that's bad. But the sense in which it's bad is it's bad from my point of view. And I don't think there's any further fact about whether anything is morally good or bad other than points of view about it. So that's really what it comes down to for me, is denying this specific metaphysical and conceptual claims that certain philosophers make. But I very much see morality as a human construction and endeavor that has immense value, and is super useful for us, both at the level of the individual, like our personal moral standards. I have personal moral standards, and at the societal level of these systems being useful for societies living harmoniously and minimizing conflict. I don't know if that addresses your question.
It does. It does. I really appreciate that. No, thanks for filling me in, because that's going to help make the conversation forward go so much smoother. I actually agree with that. I agree that there is no moral objective truth. However, I would actually extend that umbrella and say there is no objective honour, there is no objective justice, there is no objective mercy, there is no objective ethics, which is why I was wondering why you were targeting morality specifically when a lot of these human constructs don't have any objective basis.
Yeah, so it's really a question of simplification. So there's standard terminology used in academia, and I tend to use that terminology. And I'm also trying to minimize the amount of words I use here. So I could have, like, on the list, there's no objective justice, mercy, goodness, badness, rightness, wrongness, fairness, unfairness. Like, I could have the whole list. But yeah, I think I don't think there's objective truth in any of those domains when it comes to a certain conception of normativity. What I don't think that there are facts about what's morally right or wrong, and this could include notions of justice and virtue and fairness that exist out there in the world and are binding on us independent of what we care about and what we value. I don't think there's anything like that. And that applies across the board. But I have to be careful not to have that misconstrued as saying something like, I don't care about fairness and justice and morality and like not harming people, because of course I care about those things.
Look, no, absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I'm very much of the same stance. Is morality trying to encapsulate all of that sort of without having the excess lengthy words at the top? So you sort of have put a lot of that into the moral basket, or is moral specific something that you're interested in?
Yeah, I'm kind of just throwing everything in the basket. I do think it's possible for someone to be very careful and draw out distinctions about the things that I might not include in that. Although technically I'm a normative anti-realist, so I'm an anti-realist about any type of normativity. And this is why a little earlier I was talking about this distinction between descriptive claims and normative claims. And what I specifically really take issue with is the idea that there are any normative claims about what's right or wrong or what you should or shouldn't do, that you can't understand as a type of descriptive claim. I think all of those claims could be understood as a type of descriptive claim, but many, perhaps the majority of philosophers don't think that. And they're quite confident that there are certain sorts of claims that cannot be understood as descriptive claims. And the term for that is irreducibly normative. They're normative in a way that can't be reduced or treated as a type of description. And so what I'm really after, what I'm really objecting to is a specific set of views and concepts in academic philosophy. And I think that those ideas in academic philosophy have had a negative influence on discussions about morality, because I think that productive discussions about morality should construe it as a human enterprise in which basically there's a back and forth between people. We're negotiating. I have my sets of goals, other people have their sets of goals, and reaching common ground is a matter of diplomacy and negotiation. It's bargaining. But that's not how many philosophers construe it. They construe it as, no, there's a list of rules out there in the universe, and whatever's on that list of rules, we all have to submit to. And to me, there's something, I think it's a residual sort of quasi-religious conception of morality, almost as if there were a God presenting the facts like the Ten Commandments. But it's more like the Ten Commandments, but they're not written by God. They're just written into the fabric of the universe, almost like the laws of physics, and we have to conform to them. But, something I point out, what if the stuff on the list was like really awful stuff? Like, what if it turned out the objective moral facts are like, you have to be mean to puppies or something? I'm not going to follow those facts. I don't want to.
I'm sorry, I fully agree. I've just never heard anyone say it like that before. That's brilliant. I'm a baby in the philosophy world. I have had no formal education on it. But it is a lot of fun to discuss. And I absolutely have encountered that rather rigid way of thinking. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to identify as a Christian here, and that may automatically put a few flags up in terms of rigid thinking that people might think. But I have absolutely encountered that. And what I say and what I think regarding not just morals, but ethics and philosophy is often counterintuitive to what the Christian ethos teaches. And I am aware of that. But I'm going to give you a follow, because that was really interesting. I would love to learn more about that.
Thanks.
And for sure, that's something that we'd love to talk about. But I know there's someone else waiting to come up, and I'll let them
think so.
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. I'll let them have their opportunity to speak, but hopefully we get an opportunity to talk further about this, because you are absolutely right. And everyone has had some sort of thing that they feel is absolutely right but can't say why, and it's probably because it's not an absolute right, it's just a gut feeling that they've got that they really want it to be right.
That's fair. Yeah. So I will bring up the next person. Thanks so much. And I will say a couple things about that. Let me bring them up in the meantime. And thanks so much for being here. I'm still working out the format here. There we go. All right.
How's it going, Lance?
Hey, Thanks so much, Steph, for coming up. And before I address you, I just wanted to say regarding that whole Christianity thing. I was just speaking to someone on my YouTube channel. So for everybody here, I do have a YouTube channel also called Lance Independent. Go check that out. I'm going to be going back and forth between the two. And I was just speaking to someone who's a Christian who's also a moral anti-realist. They think moral facts are stance dependent, not stance independent. So I don't think there's a logical inconsistency there. And there are Christians that think that as well. If you look at the Phil Paper survey, I think it was 15% of the theists that answered that survey chose anti-realism. So I don't think they're logically inconsistent, and I've never seen any scriptural basis for like Christian doctrine requires moral realism. So I don't think that's the case. Anyway, welcome. It's cutting off the end of your name, so I'm just seeing the tree.
Yeah, it's Tree of Liberty.
Tree of Liberty. Welcome.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about?
So initially, I had one thing I was going to talk about, and but as the discussion went on, I've realized that we agree on pretty much almost everything. I'm gonna say almost because I don't know the rest of your beliefs. But I am a moral subjectivist and error theorist, and the way you formulated morality, I agree totally with how every sort of normative judgment is reducible to a descriptive statement, and I always put it in tandem with some sort of end goal, right? So okay, yeah, we both agree on that. And I was just going to make, because I don't really know what to talk about now, I was going to make a comment on how Christianity can, of course, be consistent with pretty much any sort of subjective viewpoint on morality. Because, if God says something is moral and they're all powerful, you would kind of want to listen to it. But then that begs, how do we prove God? And yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than you definitely are learned in philosophy. What is your background?
So I have a background in philosophy and psychology. I did 2 separate bachelors. So I'll just give a little like educational biography. So I started out as an undergrad in philosophy. I started taking so many psychology courses. Somebody just at some point was like, look, why don't you just get a psychology degree too? I ended up with 2 bachelor's degrees rather than a dual degree. So I actually have the 2 diplomas separate. I don't recommend people do that. I had way too many credits. I took a lot of courses in college for fun. I ended up doing a master's in philosophy. I wasn't sure where to go or what to do because I like philosophy and psychology. I do interdisciplinary work that's at the intersection of both. I ended up doing a terminal master's. That's where it's just a master's with no PhD component in philosophy in Boston. I went to Tufts University for my master's, and kind of the idea was Boston is like this like really big sort of central area where there's tons and tons of universities. And I was able to also be a research assistant in a moral psychology lab while I was there. You have, MIT is there, Harvard is there. There's lots of cool talks to go to. So I just sort of immersed myself in both. And then when I ended up applying for a PhD, I applied for philosophy programs that would allow me to do psychology, or that I hoped would, and psychology programs that would allow me to do philosophy, or at least I hope they would. And that worked out. So I ended up at Cornell. Okay. And I ended up being able to do experimental philosophy through my psychology program. So basically, experimental philosophy, you take the tools of psychology and you address philosophical questions or how people think about philosophical questions using the tools of psychology, usually social psychology. So I ended up getting my PhD in social psychology. So that's the whole sort of educational background.
Right. So the reason I asked is because in my experience, when I'm discussing philosophy with people, there seems to be a great variability in the type of language that is that they use, right? Mm-hmm. And I use a very specific language because I try to speak in simpler terms because, other people from other school of thoughts, some people are Kantians and some people are Hegelians and some people are et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes I encounter that they all use this different sort of diction, and you use probably the best example of academic diction that I've seen on this app. I don't have a formal education in philosophy. A lot of my study has been on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and reading various individual philosophers' works. And I it's really refreshing seeing someone speak in this manner, because when I was in college, I encountered professors that, they didn't. It seemed to be a lot of the existentialists, like the philosophers that liked existentialism. No hate on existentialism, but a lot of them were they didn't truly use the type of academic jargon that I would expect from a philosopher, and it's just refreshing to hear.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say, if I get too technical with language, with like the terminology I use or the distinctions that I start talking about, it can lose people's attention and interest, and that's a major downside. And that's through no fault of their own. I think a lot of philosophers, like, look, one thing, if you study philosophy, it can help you speak more clearly and draw distinctions more clearly. There are advantages, but there are disadvantages. So, one of them is that if you find yourself down this path where you become really used to talking in certain ways, it's hard to sort of like shift that set of vocabulary that you use and speak another speak without using that terminology. And often that terminology, it might serve a useful functional purpose, but a lot of times it's superfluous. I think an enormous amount of academies, like the terminology, is actually not necessary, and it can impair people's ability to understand things. So I do appreciate the positive remarks, but I do want to say that there are trade-offs. And, one thing that I don't like is that I've put myself through the academy, so to speak, and yet I've always had a kind of anti-elitist side to me. Like, I don't like the sort of ivory tower attitude. I don't like when there's like academic gatekeeping. So I love autodidactism. I like a world where everybody feels comfortable working on and studying issues, and it not being like it has to go through the filter of the university or else it doesn't count.
I totally agree. And the reason why I was applauding your specific jargon is because in my opinion, it is the most palatable of any of the sorts of jargon. And that's why I myself use it, because like I'll use one group that I like to bully a lot. It's the objectivists, and what their sort of usage of words, a lot of them, like how they would use subjective versus objective. A lot of those terms that they use, they will use the same terms as people that are in contemporary philosophy, but they have totally different like definitions to them. And when two people like debate, when an objectivist debates someone that's not an objectivist, it just devolves into a lot of, they're just not understanding each other because they're using different words, and as you said, it's superfluous. I just see like the jargon that you use, because I'm anti-elitist as well, because I'm a college dropout. The thing that I'm doing is I'm writing novels, and I want to make philosophy palatable in a sort of like narrative format.
Cool.
Yeah, I just it is a, yeah, I can tell that you were very structured with how you say things, and it was understandable. Yes.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, one reason I got real structured with it is when I moved from a philosophy program to a psychology program, I found myself repeatedly, like, I would start talking about issues and people would say, hold on, you got to break this down for us, because they're not in philosophy. And so I had to learn to translate philosophy to psychologists. And over the years, I learned to sort of pare down those explanations and get to like the core of the differences and distinctions. Like, philosophers love to split hairs and then split the splits between the hairs, and in this like fractal pattern that infinitely spirals downward into a million useless distinctions. But some of those distinctions are useful, and it's useful to point them out. But I've totally seen what you're talking about in online discussions like this, where people are using terminology like objective, subjective, mind independent, stance independent, and they're not using it in the same way as the person that they're talking to. One of my biggest issues, one thing that really frustrates me in those discussions is I am very fond of asking people, what do you mean by that? Or can you explain what you mean by that? Now, I have a series of videos, like I've done like shorts on here. I call them shorts, but I always hit like the 10-minute limit for TikTok. But I say stuff like, one of the things, okay, here's an example of something people will do. And I have a short on this, is someone will use a term, like they'll say something like, well, do you think it's absolutely good? And then if you say, what do you mean by absolutely good? They'll respond with, oh, you don't know what absolute means? And they'll say it in a really like condescending way, like you're a moron because you don't know what absolute means. And, the issue there is it's like, they're not understanding the question. The question isn't, hey, I don't know how this word would be used in contexts where its meaning is clear. It's that we're in a specific context where you're using a specific word in a seemingly technical way, and I don't know what you mean. It's not that I don't know what the word means. So people will use this rhetorical shame tactic to not clarify what they mean. And a lot of times in conversations, people really object to clarification. People will mock you and give you a hard time if you ask them what they mean too much. And audiences will turn on you. They'll say, you're trying to dodge, you're trying to evade, you're trying to tangle the person up. And there's a dark side to this too, because some people will dodge and evade and try to tangle people up by asking them what they mean by everything, and that could be super annoying. Someone is talking and someone will interrupt them. Hold on. You use the word good. Give me a definition of good. And someone can just endlessly mire you in this sludge of irritating and pointless demands that you clarify things into infinity. So it cuts both ways. People will be too unclear, and if you demand clarity, people will give you a hard time about that. Or people will be perfectly clear, and people will demand that you define things anyway just to tie you up. I don't know what you make of that, but it happens a lot in these online discussions.
It truly does, and I had firsthand experience of it. So during COVID lockdown, there's a big thing around the 2020 presidential election. It was called political TikTok. And during that time, there were on TikTok, a lot of TikTok users would host Zoom meetings. And oftentimes they'll be debating whatever was the going topic in politics at the time. And in my experience, there has been a lot of people that would, they'll take their stance, and then once you kind of seem like you don't know something, you're like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. What does he know? He doesn't know this simple term, and it's so bad faith, and I don't know. Those people aren't looking for worthwhile discussion. They're looking for power and influence over a particular group of people, over the audience. And it's, some people are honest, like you and I, and some people are not.
It's unfortunate, but it's very, very common. A lot of times people having ulterior motives for why they're debating, or just seeking power or influence, or to make other people look stupid, or to win debates. Those are all big factors. Another factor is just people just do not appreciate how tangled up language is. So I was over on YouTube, I was just talking to someone that focuses a lot on polysemy. So that's just basically when you have one word, but it has multiple meanings. And we're all familiar with that. But what he was stressing is that it's not just that you'll have one word where there's like multiple discrete meanings. A very clear example is like bank. So the word bank can both refer to like a river bank or like a bank where you go in to get money. They're very, very different things. They're very distinct and discrete. And if I say money bank, river bank, people will go, okay, yeah, those are two different uses of the term bank. So that's a polysemous term. But it's not just that words have discrete differences. It's also words, like you could think of each word as having like a set of properties, right? Like a shape, a color, and like a direction. And it really can vary along every one of those, some of them, but not others. And so words can sort of blend and blur together. So it's not like they're polysemous where they have discrete meanings A, B, and C. It's more like it's like a spectrum, and like sometimes the word is here on there, and sometimes it's here, and then there might be three different, it's way more blurry and messy than that. And people just do not appreciate that. So I agree with you that a lot of times people are like seeking power or seeking influence, or have sort of social goals in what they're doing. But a lot of it is just people have not really internalized how messy language is. And that's just a big problem.
Oh, I mean, I tend to be kind of pessimistic in terms of debate after my experiences in them. Mm-hmm. But I totally agree. Like so when I was, I'm about 22 right now. I'm almost 22, and a lot of my philosophy study has been young, and when I was a kid, I used to do a lot of coding online. So when I think about language, when I define a variable in code, I think of it like I'm actively stating the meaning of this word, and that word can mean absolutely anything. It's just a sound held relative to some sort of metaphysical qualities that we attribute to it. And like I don't know if you've read Tolkien, but J.R.R. Tolkien, right? He made languages. I'm a fantasy author. I've made a language. It's weird when you like look at linguistics and realize how amorphous and unanchored like words truly are. Because yeah, as you said, anything can be. I mean, with the riverbank and bank, a lot of things are more polysemous than they seem. It's just that those are the common polysemous uses of the word.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not finding points of disagreement, which is fine. Is it okay if I move on to the next guest? Would you be cool with that?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm just giving you a follow.
Awesome. Okay, so you are welcome to come up anytime and have a chat. So I will eventually be doing. I don't know. Do you watch Danny Phil Talk?
No.
Oh, okay. You should give him a follow. He argues with people about religion. So Danny's really the person that got me motivated to get on here and start talking about metaethics and that sort of thing. But yeah, thanks for the follow too. Welcome to talk anytime. I'll probably shift more towards focusing on the prompt and people who disagree in the future. But for now, I'm being more chill about it. I do see one request, so I'm going to take them. So thanks so much for being around, and feel free to talk again.
Okie dokie. And
All right, take care. All right. Our next guest is PJ. So we will see if PJ is able to make it up here.
Yes.
Hey,
yes.
How's it going?
That was good. Good. How are you?
Good. Do you disagree with me about the prompt? Is that what you want to talk about, or you want to talk about something else?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this prompt. I'm kind of
Awesome. Okay.
confused on it. I'm trying to see how there is no objective truth. I just want you to kind of elaborate on that.
Okay. So it's specifically that there's no objective moral truth. So do you want me to elaborate on that? I just want to be
Yes.
clear because
Yes,
my
sir.
first guest thought I was saying there was no objective truth at all, which I'm not saying.
Okay, I want you to elaborate on it. I understand.
Sure. Okay. So what I'm specifically denying is that there are facts about what's right or wrong, or what is good or bad, or what we should or shouldn't do in a specifically moral context that are true independent of anybody's goals, standards, or values, the standards of individuals, the standards of groups, anything like that. So that there are, facts like stealing is wrong, that you shouldn't steal independent of whether you want to or not. So I don't think there's moral facts of that kind. And that's the only thing that I'm denying. I'm not denying that, personally, I don't think people should steal. I mean, unless there's a very good reason. So I'm not denying that people should be moral, or I'm not denying that I have moral standards because I do. I'm specifically denying that morality is in a certain sense out there in the way that mathematical facts or facts about chemistry are out there. I think morality is a sort of human construction.
Okay, I get you in a way, but saying so that kind of makes you kind of putting it as the label as being relative, correct?
It's something similar to that. I don't tend to use the term, I wouldn't go around saying I'm a moral relativist, but my view is in the sort of ballpark of that category of views. So I tend to say I'm a moral anti-realist.
Because the way I'm thinking about it, right? That means with everybody that we will kind of put everybody morals as being subjective. Meaning, if people decide they like to go on a lot of people, then it's not right, it's not wrong. Or if they got people that want to, be pedos or whatever, it's not really right or wrong. It's just something based off what they like to do. So it's just...
So on my view, other people's actions can be wrong. They are wrong. They're just not objectively or stance independently wrong. So the view that there are no stance independent or objective moral truths is not the view that there's no moral truths. I do think that there are things that are moral and immoral. And so people unaliving others, for no good reason or just for fun, I do think that's wrong. I don't think it stands independently wrong. I don't think it's wrong independent of the fact that I think that and disapprove of it and don't want people to do that. I think that when I say it's wrong, it means that I disapprove of it. That's what I mean.
So if we could talk about unaliving somebody, for example, it could be justified in different ways based off like a robbery or, somebody's trying to just take your life. Yeah, this is considered you defending yourself. But as we looking at somebody that is unaliving somebody that is considered objectively wrong, um, but it's kind of, I mean, if you're doing it in the different scenarios, if somebody try to unalive somebody to protect themselves, of course that would be well justified. But people that feel like it's okay to unalive people, we see that as being very objectively wrong.
Well, so one important distinction to make is the distinction between contextualism and some type of anti-realism or relativism. So, certainly some type of category of action. And I want to go for ones that are like less likely to get on the like TikTok radar, like unaliving. So I'll go with stealing. In many cases, like take the action of stealing. Is stealing always wrong? Like are 100% of instances in which a person is taking something that doesn't belong to them, is it always morally wrong? I would say no. What if someone has a dangerous weapon and they're stealing it so they can't use it? I think it might be morally justified. It might be morally good. Or let's say a person, the only way for them to save 1 million people is to steal a single glass of water from someone that doesn't need it. I think it would be good for them to do it. So, I mean, we can imagine like really far-fetched hypotheticals like that, but there's real world cases where people have stolen where it's probably morally justified. So that's contextualism, and that's consistent with realism and anti-realism. It's a different distinction. What that is it's a recognition that a broader category of actions, that those actions can be morally permissible in some contexts and morally impermissible in other contexts. And I certainly think that, but it's also consistent with moral realism too. So realists could think, yeah, it's objectively morally wrong to steal for fun or for like to steal, an enormous amount of money just to take a vacation. That would be wrong objectively on a realist view, probably. But they might also think it's okay or morally permissible to steal in other contexts. So that's one distinction to set aside. I don't know if that clarifies anything for you with respect to my view.
'Cause I had a similar interaction with somebody that was on live, but I was insisting the action is wrong objectively, but overall it could be justified depending on the circumstances. But it doesn't opt them out for being, still doing something that is considered wrong. Like say for instance how you was bringing up the stealing. Of course we know that it's stealing, but people may need to steal just to survive. Now, it's not good to steal, but they did it because at the point of time that they were in, they had to stay alive. But the whole thing we're looking at is the action is still supposed to be judged. So it's like saying, for instance, it could be anybody that's stealing and they need to provide for their families. That's obviously that's what circumstances that they were put in. But based off, like we understand that stealing is wrong, we'll hold those people accountable also for stealing. Because we understand that stealing is always going to be wrong. So that might result into the person going to jail, but we know that it's wrong. So like the same thing with lying, but we know the action is wrong, but despite the reason, a lie is a lie,
Yeah, and I'm not, I think I would be on the same page with moral realists about that. So I'm an anti-realist, they're a realist. In most like real world circumstances, we're going to agree on the moral issues. Like we're just not going to, and if there are disagreements, it's not really about metaethics. So the position I'm taking here is a position about metaethics, and we got to be careful to keep that distinct from the sort of practical and normative and applied moral questions where we will probably find a lot of common ground. But so I would be interested like on your view. Here would be one way to ask the question. Let's say that there were two people that disagreed. Let's pick an issue. Let's abortion. Can you talk about abortion on TikTok? I don't know what what all the
Yeah,
rules
yeah,
are.
you could talk about abortion on TikTok. They
Cool.
got a lot of lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say that there's a discussion between two people.
Hmm.
So Alex says, "Hey, abortion is morally wrong," and then Sam says, "No, no, no, abortion's not morally wrong." Would you say they could both be correct, even though they clearly disagree with one another, or do you think that at least one of them would have to be incorrect if they disagree?
Um, I feel like it's like it's the truth. Okay, I'm gonna say this. I value every human life. Anybody that decides to lay in the bed and you make a baby, I desire any human life. But they do have exceptions. They got women that do have miscarriages. They have women that, they may have to get the baby taken out of them early based off them losing their lives. But that's the exceptions. Now we
Mhm.
looking at for as abortion, majority of women that go get abortions are people that are having unprotected sex and not being responsible adults. So we hold them at that standard, because we understand that if we sleep around, we're going to have a baby. It's not, I don't take rocket scientists behind it. So we understand that it will lead up to sex. Now we want the people to be accountable of their own actions instead of taking this human life because of their own actions that they want to perceive, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, and that I think addresses the nuances of like the abortion issue. But I'm trying to get at a more fundamental question. So we could even set the abortion issue aside. Imagine a scenario where people are agreeing on the exact specific issue in question, and they still have a moral disagreement. So they're not. It's not like one of them is saying, "Hey, abortion is permissible in these cases," and then the other person saying, "Okay, but it's not permissible in these other cases," because then they're not really disagreeing with one another. Let's say it's a
Hmm.
very specific case, like they read about a particular event that took place, and then they
Hmm.
both disagree. One says it's morally right, one says it's morally wrong. What would you say about that sort of scenario? Do you think that two people with conflicting moral positions can at the same time be correct, or would at least one of them have to be incorrect?
That's a good question. Um, I think. Well, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say this. In some cases, yes and no. So it depends on the situation. So sometimes people may be
Okay.
correct in both, and some may be correct, and another one may be wrong. I would say that.
Cool. Okay, so I should tell you there is psychological research on this, and it's interesting that you say it could be one or the other because what they did in a lot of that psychological research is they give people a bunch of cases, and most people will say they can both be right in some cases, and they at least one of them's wrong in other cases. So that's actually like a pretty common response. The cool thing is that that's not really consistent with what one might expect if people had these like conventional philosophical views. So I think the way a lot of people think about these issues just doesn't really fit with the way philosophers do. And that's a big thing for me. This is why I love getting on TikTok and YouTube and all these places and talking to people because I think philosophers spend way too much time talking to each other and reading one another's work and they don't spend enough time just talking to people.
Yeah, because I'm more of a logical person. I try to think what's best for the situation. I don't let my feelings get into to no situation I get put in or I hear about. I just look at what's concrete evidence is this evidence being reliable so that I can
Mm.
actually come up with a definite answer instead of just going by what other people are saying. Like, say for instance, we could use like a lot of like the presidents, like for example. A lot of people don't know too much about the presidents. We just go off what we hear instead of doing our own
Mm.
research on the presidents, if that makes sense. But
Hmm.
I think that's the thing. I try to be as real as I can be. I don't let my feelings dictate anything. As much as the way I feel, if I know it's wrong, it doesn't matter how I feel. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Fair enough. Are there any other points you wanted to discuss or bring up?
No, I was just kind of getting your view on it, kind of getting your point on it, trying to get you to understand it more. I understand you. Yeah, you kind of
Cool.
like me. Kind
Cool. All
of
right.
like me.
Okay. If that's it, then I'll move on to the next guest. I really appreciate you coming on here. Feel free to come back. I'd love to talk again. That was fun.
All right.
Awesome. Alrighty. Take care. All right. We have our next guest. I think it's Lennon. And thanks so much for everybody. I think a couple people have sent things my way. Appreciate that. And also, I see a lot of stuff in the chat. So people hashing it out with each other. It's too much for me to address that and my guests. So I guess I'll just have fun in the chat, but keep it civil. Hi, Lennon. How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
Doing all right. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so it's an interesting prompt. I'm kind of really just starting to get into like academic philosophy and really trying to hone in. And so obviously it's making me question my own beliefs. And so I guess I'll give you my perspective, and I'm curious where that would line up on this. And I would think that morality is subjective. And the reason why I would justify that is that it's sort of based on a mind that, for example, let's take the stealing example. If humans didn't exist, the concept of stealing wouldn't exist. So therefore, it would be a subjective moral opinion based on a human brain. That's kind of where I'm standing at. I'm wondering where that kind of falls in the line of thinking of morality philosophically. So then that way I can sort of take that train of thought and that school of thought and maybe do further research.
Sure. So when it comes to subjectivism as a metaethical position, I understand it to be the claim that, if we're just going by the classical definition that you would get in contemporary metaethics, it would be something like this. Moral claims are true or false relative to the standards of individuals. And so subjectivism in that respect is a view about what it is that makes a moral claim true. And it's specifically that the attitudes, standards, or values of individuals make the moral claims that they make true relative to their standards. So like if a person says stealing is wrong, you could understand that to mean something like stealing is inconsistent with my standards. And then that would be true if it is inconsistent with their standards, and then false if it's not, like if they're lying or something. And so in that respect, subjectivism has a rather narrow definition, and it's about what it is that makes a moral claim true. What you describe, I'm not sure it's the same thing. So there's another sense in which people use the term subjective. And if you look at something like, I was just reading Philip Goff's new book, Why? And there he just says right out, and Goff is a professional philosopher who says, yeah, people use the term like subjective in a bunch of different ways. Another way in which people use subjective, and it's no less valid a way to use the term, is they use it to refer to a sort of the perspective from which someone holds a particular point of view. So I could say, like, subjectively, from my point of view, if I look right here, I'm looking out my window right now. So it looks like there's several trees from my point of view. And so subjectively, it appears there's trees. But in that case, I don't take it to be that, like, the fact that there are trees outside of my window is true because of my attitudes or preferences. So this use of the term subjective is a different meaning. So even though the words are the same, subjective and subjective, they have two different meanings. One is about things being true relative to attitudes or preferences, and the other is about a perspective from which something is regarded or held to be the case. And that second case is not what subjectivism is in metaethics. So subjectivism isn't really the view that, like, moral claims like require people to be making them. And part of the reason for that is you could think about other sorts of things that people might like claims about the colors of objects. If you disambiguate that, there is a sense in which the light reflected off of objects, that light is being reflected regardless of whether there's anybody to see it or not. And that's very different from a claim about like it appearing a particular way from a person's point of view. That like the light is being reflected in that particular way regardless of whether anybody's around or not. Same thing for like the periodic table. Like if there was nobody around, if the humans didn't exist, and we're setting aside the question of like aliens creating periodic tables, if humans didn't exist, no one would ever have created a periodic table. That doesn't mean like the facts about chemical composition aren't exactly what they are. You know what I mean?
Right. But
so you don't really need people for there to be more like these you don't, that sense in which you need people to make moral claims, that doesn't make morality subjective by itself.
Okay, so that's kind of what I mean when I say that. It's like without someone to make up the meaning or concept of a wrong action, then there can't really be one, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. And so you know what I mean? There are some objective facts in reality, like the term the sun is a subjective description for the big ball of gas in the universe. And so if
Mhm.
humans didn't exist to invent the word the sun, the concept of the sun wouldn't exist, but that particular object would still be an
Right.
objective truth, right? So I'm curious where morality fits in here as far as what would be considered objective. Like, I guess explain an objective stance on why someone would think morals are objective. I don't really understand
Yeah.
that stance, I suppose.
So there's actually a sense in which I think technically it's not understandable because it's nonsense. So, you can't understand something if there's nothing to understand. Like if someone said, zippity bippity boo, and I said, I don't understand it. There's nothing
Right.
to understand. So certain types of objectivism about morality, I actually think are like literal nonsense. Which
Okay, yeah,
if
run through me because I don't think I've ever actually heard anyone, well, except for people like theists and stuff like that, try to claim that morality is objective because it comes from an objective being or whatever. But I don't really understand technically that claim. And do you mind running it through for me?
Sure. So there's a few different types of moral realism. I often think a lot of the sort of everyday, like if you get into apologetics disputes online, when theists are invoking moral realism and you start digging into what they're saying, they're often not using the term, and they're not in the way that it's used in contemporary philosophy. They seem to be invoking different sorts of terms because they'll often just say that the moral facts are like based on what God says or something like that, and that actually sounds like a type of anti-realism. So it's often unclear what they're talking about, but often they seem to think that what it means for a moral fact to be objective is that it comes from some sort of legitimate authoritative source that's infallible and eternal, and so that's what makes it objective. But that's just not what the term means in contemporary academic philosophy. In metaethics as like an academic discipline, even though there's theists and Christians are part of that field, most of the realist accounts you encounter are secular, meaning that they don't say anything about whether God exists or not. That's just not part of what the account is about.
Yeah.
And so so typically what there's like the rough analogy would be something like this. The realist views about morality are closer to saying that moral facts are like scientific facts or mathematical facts or conceptual facts. In that they're true regardless of the attitudes or standards or values of people. They're not made true by people's attitudes. So the fact that like a carbon atoms have either 6 protons in them, I don't know if I got that right. Someone can correct me. Like the fact that they have that. Yeah. So the fact that they have, I could go with hydrogen. It has 1. The fact that the facts about chemicals aren't made true by our preferences. Like if I prefer that hydrogen actually have like 17 protons and 46 neutrons, like it doesn't just because I prefer that. I don't know why I would prefer that, but it's not made true by our preferences. But then take something like cake. Like I like chocolate cake. That chocolate cake is good from my point of view, is made true by my preferences. So if I say like, I think chocolate cake's great, the fact that I like it is what it is that makes it true that I think that it's great. So there are certain sorts of claims you can make that are, in a certain sense, they're not claims just like what the world is like. They're in a sense they are. They're a claim about our attitudes or relation to the world. And so that's what I take the subjective claims to be. But then there's these other sorts of claims, scientific claims and mathematical, like the fact that, 7 is a prime number. That's not made true by our preferences. It's also not a scientific fact. It's not one you discuss, at least some philosophers. So I'm an empiricist, so I'm fine with saying math is some kind of constructed sort of thing. But many philosophers would say it's neither a scientific fact nor a subjective fact. It's an a priori fact. It's something that's known through reasoning alone without having to consult your sense experience.
I think I would sort of jive with that thinking. To me, numbers are descriptive or a form of description of reality. Like, again, the concept of 1 + 1 would not exist, but if someone else came up with math and they came up with different words to mean the same thing as 1 + 1, then yes, that exists, but I feel like it's more of a description of reality as opposed to it being real, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you have these views. You have Platonism, which would say, no, the numbers are real, like they exist. Like there's tables and chairs and numbers. Now I
disagree with that, I think.
Yeah, so do I. But then there's also like nominalists, and there's other sorts of views that that sort of deflate the metaphysics of mathematics and don't treat it as this thing that's out there that's real. In fact, some people will go further than that. So there's even the view that actually everything is mathematics. And so, I mean, metaphysics for philosophers can get real weird. I'm pretty anti-metaphysics. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying, I'm starting to find that out.
Philosophers love their metaphysics, and so my overarching philosophical framework is pragmatism, and classical pragmatism of William James and F.C.S. Schiller, and the pragmatic approach is pretty anti-metaphysics, like explicitly. It's like, yeah, most of this is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It's nonsense. You do have other sort of anti-metaphysical views.
Is pragmatism just like sort of the function or the use of what our knowledge is? Like, basically, if we can learn stuff, but if it has no use in the world, then it's kind of useless. Is that kind of what it is?
Something like that. You have to avoid crude characterizations of pragmatism, because its critics will often say, it's just the idea that you don't care about what's real or what's true. You just care about what's useful. And then you just try to play around with words and say that, well, if it's useful, then it is true. And critics will sometimes say, okay, so then if it's useful to lie and manipulate other people, then it's like all your lies are true. And that's not how pragmatists view truth and meaning.
I got you. Right, of course.
So pragmatists are a lot more holistic in their approach, and so pragmatists can still allow for there to be lies and falsehoods and things that aren't real. All of those notions can themselves be subsumed by and understood in pragmatic terms, and so really it's more of you. It's a little hard to like lay the whole thing out, but for pragmatists, truth and meaning are the sort of end product of a process of inquiry and integration with the rest of your views. And so it's not so much that there are truths out there and then you find out what they are, but rather you engage with the world and then things become true in virtue of the relation they have with the rest of your beliefs. And so it's not like things for a pragmatist are just, if it's useful for some isolated purpose, then it's true. Because you would start running into, if you had all these isolated things where, it's useful to lie to this person, so this lie is true, but it's useful to tell this contradictory lie to this other person, so that's true too, but now you have a contradiction. Those would come to a head. You would be running into all sorts of problems if you had this really disconnected worldview where things didn't cohere. So pragmatist, it's going to turn out to be pragmatically valuable for things to cohere. And really, that's just that notion that truth is this sort of kind of an illusion, and it's really just about whatever is useful. That's not really what pragmatists are about. It sounds like you're not, sometimes people are like, no, it is like that. But
I don't actually know that, I didn't know the definition of like pragmatic philosophy. And so I was more curious than anything.
So I'm kind of new to pragmatism. So I spent many years doing experimental philosophy, moral psychology, studying evolution and like human cognition. I was really into heuristics and biases for a while. So I only recently discovered pragmatism, and I discovered it in a kind of funny way. Someone was working on their dissertation on pragmatism, so they're a pragmatist, and we became friends. We'd have all these conversations, and then they would say, "You sound like a pragmatist. You sound like a pragmatist." And then I started looking more into James and Schiller, like way later in my life, and then I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is totally what I am." So it's very new to me. So I would say look up pragmatists. There's also neo-pragmatists. It's been around for a while, but it doesn't seem to be super popular, but definitely look into it, because I think it's, of course I do, because I advocate for it. I think it's a very valuable and underappreciated approach to philosophy.
Do you have a recommendation on a book that would get me started?
I think it'd be easier if I gave you a list of books. I could message you later. But you know what? Let me give some now, because there's people on the live.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a DM.
Yeah, but I definitely want to give people a couple recommendations.
Oh, okay, cool.
So what is... So one of the ones that I'm working on now is by William James. It's called Pragmatism and the Meaning of Truth. I don't know if it's the best recommendation. It's a sort of series of lectures that's put in book format. I have it on Audible. And that's
Do you
part of the
have?
reason I got it, just because I like to listen to audiobooks because I'm always busy and doing other stuff. So I think it's great. James covers a lot of stuff, and I think it gives a pretty good foundation there. There's probably other works that might be good to recommend, but I don't have them offhand. But so
Okay.
Pragmatism and the Meaning of Truth is one that I would recommend, especially because there's an Audible version of it, and the Audible version is really good. So
Okay.
I love it. There's other stuff I would recommend. Horwich's Wittgenstein's meta philosophy is one of my favorites. That really is like very, very like my approach in a nutshell. It's not pragmatism, it's Wittgenstein, but I think the sort of 1-2 punch of Wittgenstein's meta-philosophical approach alongside pragmatism can really just blast through most metaphysical quandaries, and in a way
How
where it's
technical is it? Because again, I would say I'm a novice when it comes to like academic philosophy at the moment, and so I'd love to. I'm definitely an avid reader, but I don't want to get something where I'm reading it and 3 pages in, I'm like, I have no idea what I just read.
Gotcha. So the James one that I recommended is not technical. It's
great.
an old series of lectures. He is kind of like me. I'm verbose. So is James. So
Sure.
it's a little meandering and wordy, but it's not technical. In fact, he's explicitly going out of his way to make that non-technical and more accessible. And I found it very much so. So the James
great.
one, definitely. The Horwich one, it's not a long book. I don't think it's technical, but I'm at a point where I've like read too much academic philosophy where it's hard for me to judge how technical something would be for someone that's starting out. I didn't find it to be super technical. You're not going to see a bunch of like syllogisms and logical formalism like in the first 4 pages or something.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate.
Yeah, it's not like 1,000 pages either, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your recommendation. I might DM you anyways to get some more recommendations. Yeah, man.
Definitely. Yeah. So one last thing about that. So definitely DM me. There's a really, really amazing YouTube video. It's like 7 minutes, and the person's like, "I'm just going to give you the pragmatist account of meaning," and it's so good. It's Meaning or Truth. I can't remember. Oh my god. Okay. I'm not on my game today for the recommendations. I have to look at them to remember exactly what they have. But anyway, it's this really short video that's like more introductory, and that particular person has a set of videos on pragmatism, and they're all great. So I'll send you a link to that. I don't remember it offhand though.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. Yeah, take it easy.
Yeah. All right, you're gonna head out. Then take care.
Yeah, I'm gonna head out. I gotta hop in the car and get to work.
Alrighty, do your thing.
I appreciate it. You have a great day.
Yep, you too. Alrighty, it's always tough to give recommendations because I'm like, what did I read? Something that people will notice about me if you see me often enough is I have this kind of like weird Swiss cheese memory where certain things, if I've said them enough times, I'll like, I remember Magic the Gathering cards from like 30 years ago. Like, I remember what this card does. But then, I can't remember like what I read yesterday. So what's the last book I was reading? Actually, the last book I was reading, I do remember it. So I'm working on it after many years. I've had the book sitting on my shelf. I'm finally getting through this book. It's Julian Jaynes' The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It is the longest title I could think of. And so I just started on it. It has a really bizarre hypothesis. I'm not going to get into it. I'll have to do a whole video on it at some point. But it's so far just beautifully written, and I'm really enjoying it. I don't know if anything in it is like the main thesis is true, but it's certainly interesting. And then what else have I been working on? I don't have any requests, so if anybody wants to come up and talk to me. What is the last one? Okay, so the next ones in the queue is I have Uncontrollable, The Threat of Artificial Intelligence, and The Race to Save the World. And the other one that I'm going to be working on, and I'm like 20% through, is How Language Began, from Dan Everett. So a big interest of mine right now. So the first one that I just mentioned there is about existential risk. And the second one is about the evolution of language. So right now, a big interest of me is the evolution of language. Okay, I do see a guest request. I'm going to take a little bit of a mental break for like a couple seconds. Oh, I see 2 guest requests. Okay. Let's just say I'll take a 1 minute break, have a drink of water. And I think this might be my last one. It's more tiring than I would have expected to do this. And I guess it's because I did 2 streams on YouTube today. Okay. All right, so I think we have Lydia coming up.
Yeah, hi.
Hey,
Uh,
how's it going? I saw you in the chat a lot.
yeah, I'm very excited that I found your page. So I'm 20, I'm in college, and I'm very interested in philosophy. And I took like an intro to philosophy class last semester, and this semester I'm taking an intro to ethics course. And both of my professors told me that it said in their lectures that no real philosopher really holds to more subjective morality, and I was very confused. I myself have, I mean, I guess I hadn't had a hard stance on it, but I leaned more towards moral anti-realism just because moral realism doesn't really make any sense to me. But I'm wondering if you think there's a sense of the terms objective and subjective you think my professors might have been using, because both of them said this.
Yeah, it's an interesting claim. Are you familiar with the 2020 Phil Papers survey?
Someone in the chat did send me to those, and I saw it's like 27.7% said that they are moral anti-realists. So,
How did you get that number? Because I remember it being 26.1%.
oh, was it?
Yeah, 26.
I
We can
just
look it up right now. Let's see. 2020 Phil Papers survey. Were you looking? I hope you weren't looking at the 2009 one because they did a new one, the 2021.
I don't know. I just looked it up super fast when someone told me about it because I was curious.
26.1. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay, well, yeah. And so I don't know. I guess I'm just wondering because you said there's multiple senses of the terms. And I also like did a whole Zoom call with my ethics professor trying to understand why he was saying that it's not really a view that's taken seriously at all. Because I also don't think you should be really saying that as a philosophy professor. Like, philosophy is kind of all about the undecided or, kind of stuff. So, but even
It,
after the call, I was still confused.
Okay, so I don't know what they might have had in mind. The first thing to say is that this particular survey, I mean, always keep in mind with surveys that they may or may not be adequately representative of
Hmm.
the populations or groups they're supposed to be about. The researchers that did this, Bourget and Chalmers, did a great job, especially with being transparent about the demographic characteristics. If you look at the 2020 Phil Paper survey, but you may note, for instance, that about half of the respondents are from the United States, and that's obviously not representative of how philosophers all around the world think. So it has
Right.
its demographic limitations, but it's a very big survey. And what you'll see on there is about a quarter of philosophers, a little bit more, chose anti-realism. Now, the thing about that is that there are a variety of anti-realist positions. The three standard categories, and I'll use some of the terminology is more specific to, like, for me, because I like to be really pedantic about it, are error theory, non-cognitivism, and stance-dependent accounts. Now, non-cognitivism these days, most of the accounts these days are expressivist accounts. So you could say it's error theory, expressivism, and stance-dependent accounts. And so the error theorists are the ones that say all first-order moral claims are false. Then you have the expressivist and non-cognitivists. They don't even think morality is about making true or false claims, or they think if they are, it's a little complicated. They
Okay.
think that they're deflated. They don't have the sort of metaphysical import that realists think that they have. It's complicated these days for the expressivist views. And then you have the stance-dependent accounts, and the
Hmm.
stance-dependent accounts say, look, there are moral facts. There really are. So the error theorists say no moral facts. The non-cognitivists say no moral facts with like an asterisk because they have complicated views. But then you have the ones that say, look, I'm not a moral realist, but there are moral facts. And that actually includes a pretty interesting set of views. One of those views is subjectivism. And a sort of very standard subjectivism is that moral claims are true or false relative to the standards of individuals.
Yeah.
So there's that view. But then there's also constructivist views that are sort of more explicitly anti-realist. Humean constructivism. Sharon Street has a paper on Humean constructivism that's really cool. So there's constructivist views. There's relation designating accounts like ideal observer theory, which says that moral claims are true or false depending on what a fully informed and ideally rational agent would endorse. So you have this range of views where there are moral facts, but they're dependent on stances. And subjectivism is one of and of course cultural relativism,
Yeah.
which is a famous one. But there aren't a whole lot of academic philosophers that endorse cultural relativism, as far as I know. That's not a popular
Yeah.
position. I doubt it's none of them. Subjectivism, it's hard to know. What's a little weird is if you go through the 2020 Phil Paper survey and you look at, sorry, I get excited about surveys because whenever it's philosophy and surveys, I do surveys about philosophy. So it's like my two favorite things stuck together. So there have another question that's sort of breaking down the metaethical views, and they don't even list relativism as an option. So let me see if I could find that. Yeah, and so that means like it could be that I don't know why they did that because people would have picked it if they chose it. So let's see. One moment, I'm trying to get. Let's see if I put error theory, that'll get it. Yeah, okay. So if we look at this, morality, non-naturalism, naturalist realism, constructivism, expressivism, or error theory. So the options they're giving people are expressivism. So notice I gave that sort of tripartite breakdown where I said error theory, non-cognitivism or expressivism, and stance-dependent theories.
Yeah.
It looks like constructivism is kind of their stand-in for the stance-dependent views. That's not entirely accurate, though. So I don't know why they did that. But when you look at that, you see 20.8% shows constructivism. What's a little weird about that is that some people would argue that constructivist accounts, some of them could be realist. So these distinctions are a mess. So the first thing I would say is the distinction, no one is agreeing on how to distinguish things. So it's a big mess. So that's a problem. As far as no philosophers endorsing that view, I don't know why they would say that. It seems implausible that there aren't subjectivists.
Yeah, and the thing is last semester, I was like, maybe it's just this professor, I was like, maybe she just has a really hard objectivist stance and she lets her bias get in the way. But then I have an ethics professor, I mean, granted it's at the same school, but and he's saying the same thing. He's saying that no philosophers hold to like ethical subjectivism. And also, are ethical subjectivism and moral subjectivism the same thing?
I use the terms interchangeably. Probably most philosophers do, but it's another case where sometimes people want to split hairs and distinguish terminology, and other people don't.
Yeah, and like I said, like I had like over hour-long conversation with him, trying to understand what he was saying, and he kind of he didn't really let me speak much. I don't think it was on purpose, but I was trying to get some clarifying questions in there. But I'm switching schools in the fall because I'm moving, so maybe I'll have a different experience there. But yeah.
I'm real curious. What I would ask if you, well, first of all, is there anything more you can tell me about what they were like? Why are they saying that? What are they basing that on?
Here, let me go to the lecture where he says that, because it was like the first week where he was just going over objectivism, relativism, and subjectivism. And in both semesters, so Intro to Philosophy and Intro to Ethics, they don't really even touch much on subjectivism. All they said was that no one really holds to it, and if they do, they're mistaken.
Wait, they're teaching you about the views and they're telling you which ones are right or wrong?
Yeah, basically. And again, like last semester, I thought it was a fluke. I thought she was just kind of weird, but now this guy is like younger too, so I thought maybe he's using more updated language and she was meaning something different, but it's very strange. And
well, I got to tell you, I don't find, like, you may notice I'm not that surprised by this. So a big motivation for me. So I'm a moral anti-realist. I've been a moral anti-realist as long as I can remember, since my late teens. As soon as I thought about this stuff, I was an anti-realist right out of the gate. Yeah. I didn't have to get talked into it. One of the things that I'm big on is this. I see anti-realist views, subjectivism, relativism, error theory, non-cognitivism. I see them misrepresented and denigrated everywhere I go, all over the internet, in casual conversations, but including academic philosophers. Academic philosophers will imply or outright state that if you don't share realist intuitions, that you may have brain damage or there's something wrong with you. They'll imply that anti-realists like me might be psychopaths. They will do all sorts of stuff to imply that anti-realists themselves are bad people. And I really, really, really do not like that. I do not like it when people make false and misleading claims about the practical implications of anti-realism, because I don't think there are any significant practical implications. Nothing about anti-realism makes me any worse of a person than a moral realist. And yet, what many moral realists will do, and again, I'm saying very explicitly, professional philosophers will do this, is they will imply that moral anti-realists have horrible and repugnant normative moral views, even when that is not an entailment of what the anti-realist is saying, that they're not logically committed to that, and even
Right.
when it's super implausible that it's true. I'll give you an example, and this is, for me, this is sort of a flagship issue. It's what I call normative entanglement. So normative entanglement occurs whenever a person conflates another person's position on a descriptive issue with a normative issue. And in the case of metaethics, this occurs, or I should say, descriptive issue with a non-descriptive, a normative issue with a non-normative issue. So the way that this arises in the context of metaethics is, imagine a scenario like this. In fact, imagine someone asked you this: do you think it's objectively wrong to kick puppies just for fun? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, so how do you think people would react if we were? I mean,
I
we
think
are
they
in a
would
public
think I'm
forum.
saying that it's permissible. That's usually how
Right.
people react when I say that I don't think that it's objectively wrong, but I have to clarify, I still think it's wrong. I just don't think there's anything out there in the universe that makes it that way. It's just because that's how I feel about it.
Bingo. So you see the problem there. If I sort of compel you or pressure you to give a yes or no response,
Right.
and I say, hey, is it objectively wrong to kick puppies just for fun? And you say no, you look like a jerk.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But why do you look like a jerk? Because when you say no, notice what's happening in the question. And that's why I call it normative entanglement, is that you're embedding a question about metaethics inside a normative question. And the normative question is whether you're for or against
Right.
the permissibility of kicking puppies. Presumably you're very much against it, but you're not
Yeah.
able to answer that question. So it's really a kind of a complex question. It'd be like if I said, hey, do you think the earth is flat and that 2 + 2 = 4? Yes or no? It's a trick question.
Yeah.
So, but philosophers will do this. Philosophers who should know better will do this. You would
Yeah.
think that they would know better, and they do it anyway.
And it made me feel like I was crazy because I'm like, these are two people. One, I know at least one of them has a PhD, and I'm like, I must be mistaken. There's something I'm missing. So I went back to his lecture, and the way he defines objectivism is maintains that the same moral principles hold universally for every person and every society. So I guess that's just a different. I am not underage. I'm 20. Thank you. Sorry, weird comment. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to decide if I would even agree with that. Maintains that the same moral principles hold universally for every person and every society.
I'm not quite clear on that definition. It also doesn't sound like a conventional definition of moral realism, because moral realism has to do with stance independence. It doesn't have to do with universalism.
Well, it just says objectivism. But is that like the same thing?
It's sometimes used to mean the same thing and sometimes not. Unfortunately, that's not my fault. That's philosophers' fault. It's something that I point out. Like maybe this is true in the sciences that sometimes they use different terminology, but if you're in like medicine or biology, I would imagine people need to get squared away, like what kind of cell we're
Right.
talking about or what kind of like blood cell this is, because if you get the diagnostics wrong in a medical context,
Right.
something medically terrible could happen. But philosophers can't get squared away on the terminology. They just use the terminology
So,
differently.
and it seems like we're talking past each other a lot during these things too. So the way he defines ethical subjectivism is maintains that moral principles hold for just particular persons. A person's principles are determined by what that person believes to be morally right.
Yeah, those don't say, I mean, it's hard to give a definition, especially in a sentence or two, for philosophical positions. So, I wouldn't say that those definitions are like incorrect or anything, but it would
Yeah.
require elaboration to know quite what's meant by those. And the terms may be being used in a way different from the way I'm using them.
And another thing is, he lists a problem for ethical subjectivism that says you can't appeal to any moral oughts to others. And he really doesn't elaborate on that at all. He just says that it's a problem, kind of like we're supposed to accept it. And I'm instinctually like, I want to tell him, well, that's not true. You can definitely appeal to moral oughts to others. You just don't think that it's like written in the stars that they ought to do it. It's
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes people will say that subjectivists they can't disagree or object to other people's actions. That would be no basis for disagreement, and disagreement wouldn't make sense. And so the argument would go something like this: people engage in genuine moral disagreement, but if subjectivism were true, then they wouldn't be able to do that. And then the idea would be that, look, there's a problem with subjectivism, which is that if we look out in the world, people are genuinely having actual disagreements. But if subjectivism were true, they wouldn't be having actual disagreements. So there's something wrong with subjectivism. And I don't buy that at all. And part of the reason I don't buy that, I mean, one would just be that maybe subjectivism is true and everybody is talking past one another and they're confused. I certainly don't think that's impossible or even that implausible. But the other issue is just something that I've made a point of about disagreement, which is that philosophers seem to construe genuine disagreement as disputes, like contrary views about what is true. But that's only one type of disagreement. Imagine you're going out to buy a car, and if you were going out to buy a car, are you going to pay any amount of money for a car, or are you going to try to pay the least amount of money you can for whatever car you want? What are you going to do?
I'm going to try to pay the least amount of money.
Okay, now the person selling you the car, are they going to sell it to you for the least amount of money you're willing to pay?
No.
They're going to try to do what?
The opposite. They're trying to get the most money.
Right. So are you going to just immediately agree on the price of the car?
No.
Okay, so you disagree about the price of the car?
Yeah.
Okay, is there an objective fact of the matter about the price of the car?
No, there's not.
So it turns out, since there's no objective fact, then you can't disagree about the price of the car. So what are you doing?
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So you see how that's like obviously silly. There is no objective fact about the price of the car. What there is a conflict of goals or interests. That's like a common disagreement. A common disagreement is actually a disagreement about what to do, not about what's true. So you can agree, like, this is the car. You're not disagreeing about like which car it is you're talking about, what the features of the car are. Those would be disagreements about what's true. Like if you're like, actually the car is kind of messed up, you need to fix the tires or something, that'd be a disagreement about what's true. If they're like, no, the tires are fine. But you could agree on all the facts, and then you just have conflicting goals. A lot of disagreements are like that. And disagreements in moral terms could be someone wants to take your wallet, you don't want to give them your wallet. And if you have in that, I would call that a disagreement. You don't agree about what should take place. You don't want your wallet to be in their possession. Now, in that circumstance, it'd be kind of weird to try to convince the person, hey, there are objective moral facts, and among those facts are the fact that it's wrong for you to steal. That would be a weird conversation to have. Yeah. Typically, in these sorts of scenarios, you try to appeal to that person's goals and interests. Right. Hey, you might get caught. Hey, I have a family. You're taking money away that I'm going to use to pay for my grandmother's medication. You appeal to their empathy. Typically, disputes are disputes where people are coordinating and navigating conflicting goals and interests. They're not just arguing about what's true without any context or reason. So I think philosophers, when they discuss these things, have a weird, narrow, and almost inhuman understanding of disagreement, where they don't understand that real-world disagreements are typically coordination disputes about conflicts of interests or goals. They're not just two people that are like, I think this is true, and the other person's like, I don't think it's true. Who's going to just sit around arguing about what's true for no reason? So yeah, subjectivists totally can argue with one another and disagree. They are disagreeing about what to do, not about what's true. So philosophers, for whatever reason, don't seem to notice this a lot of the time. It's really weird. One thing you'll notice, especially if you're starting out studying philosophy, so I'm super critical of a lot of philosophy out there. I love philosophy. I don't like how a lot of philosophy is done. I think that philosophers have ended up being saddled with a lot of bad methods and presumptions and dogmas. So that's my view.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I know you probably have other people in the guest box, so I'll just say one more thing. I wish I could show you this. I don't have camera access on my main account. My live access is restricted right now, so I'm on my second, but there's like I'm on his slideshow from our first week, and he's asking whether or not, it's kind of what you were talking about, like kicking the puppy, right? He has a sentence on here. It is never morally permissible to R-word, torture, and M-word an innocent child for fun. And there's a picture of a little boy like sobbing. And like when I was watching the lecture, it felt a lot like intuition pumping to me. Like you were saying, like, oh, well, you think it's wrong? Like, do you think it's objectively wrong? He's basically doing that in his lecture, which is kind of crazy because he's supposed to be teaching us the theories, not telling us which one to go with.
Yeah, I can't speak about your specific situation because I'm only getting your side of the story. So
No,
I'm going to
I
be
totally understand that. I totally understand that.
right,
And
but I will say not about this specific case, but I've encountered this many, many, many times with professional philosophers. I've seen this in textbooks. I've seen this in articles. I've seen this in tweets. I've seen this in YouTube videos, TikTok videos, where again, people with PhDs, even people that wrote their dissertations on metaethics, will present anti-realist views like relativism in ways that I think are not just misleading and false, but borderline unethical. Because again, they keep implying that people like me are evil. And
yeah, that's crazy.
I'm not particularly fond of that.
Yeah.
And one would think that they would know better, but apparently they don't. And one of my big goals in like one of my overarching projects is to revive to basically counter this like sort of negative like I don't know what term to use for it, but basically trying to present anti-realist as bad. I really don't like that, and I'm trying to work against that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate this. This has been something that's been on my mind for like a year now because of this. So maybe I'll even schedule another Zoom call with my professor and try to understand what he means more, because I don't know, I'm holding out hope that he's just using the term differently than I am. But I really appreciate you and the conversation, and thank you so much for letting me up.
Yeah, no problem. And I would just say in those conversations, be as charitable as you can.
Absolutely.
Even if you disagree with people, always try to be charitable. I mean, there might be contexts where a person steps over the line or is rude or something, but I do my absolute best to presume in every conversation, unless it really goes out of line, good faith that they're doing their best, and just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Lance.
Yeah,
Have
no
a good
problem. Take care. Yep. Alrighty. So I don't see any guests in. Oh, I do. It says one guest request, but then it's not listing a number down there. So I'll see if they will accept, and this will be the last one, because after that I gotta go. I gotta go make dinner. It's getting pretty late.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Hey, thanks so much for letting me come up. I actually recently started following you. I'm really glad I came across your videos. I really love your content and everything.
Thanks.
Hopefully you can help me. I'm gonna try to, because I know you just said you want to run. So maybe you can just help me with a little piece of it. But because of my ex-religious background, I've had to do a lot of rethinking about and reorganizing of my own worldviews, right? I used to be really hardcore, like ex-evangelical. I'm a ex-fundamentalist, I should say. So once I came out of that bubble, intuitively I started I didn't know what the words were, the theories were called or anything like that, but intuitively I was like, man, like morals have to be subjective. Like that's just the only broad term that I could come up with in my own head. When I try to go further down that rabbit hole, there was so much material about it. It's insane. Like there's just so many terms that just drives, like my brain is just convoluted about it. But
It's a
hearing
mess.
you, it's a mess. And I love philosophy. I love reading different types of viewpoints and things like this. I don't mind hard topics, but for example, I pull up this Stanford Encyclopedia article on moral anti-realism, and oh my God, I wanted to cry. So it's like, what do you mean? What I'm trying to kind of just dig out of this is the first time I heard moral error theorists was actually in one of your videos, and I thought it was kind of like a catch-all term that turns out no. Like there's like moral error theorists, there's non-objectivism, there's moral skepticism, all these types of things, right? So if you were someone like me coming out of this religious worldview type stuff, and the kind of arguments that you would tend to encounter just with old friends and things like that. Okay, how can I explain this? If you're a person who comes from that world, you are a realist, and you believe morals objectively exist, A, because of God, right? Oh, God said it, so it's out there, and they are real. If you were someone who did not believe in God, right, and you were still a moral realist, what do you hang that on? If there's no, like, what do people who say, no, morals objectively exist, hang that on if there's no God in their worldview? I want to know that, for starters.
So some of them are going to say that the moral facts, there are moral facts, and those moral facts are a type of natural fact. So they might say, well, moral facts are facts about what increases well-being and decreases suffering. So that'd be a moral naturalist. Or their moral facts are facts about what increases cooperation. So there are facts about that. So that's one perspective, that moral facts just fit generally within a naturalistic worldview. And the other are non-naturalist, secular moral realists. And they're going to take a few different approaches, but typically what they're going to say is, okay, well, you don't need God for these objective moral facts. And they're not natural facts, they're non-natural facts. Now, part of the reason for that is, basically one of the approaches that's taken to get you to that point, although not everybody would endorse this, and I wouldn't, and a lot of realists wouldn't, is you could ask this question, like, hey, for any given thing, like if someone says, hey, kicking puppies is bad, or causing suffering is bad, there's this kind of open question you can ask about it. You can ask, well, is that really bad? And because the question for many people seems legitimate, it looks like it's at least not part of the meaning of moral goodness or badness, that it's about suffering or it's about cooperation or whatever. And so whatever it is, it might be something that's sui generis. It's autonomous. It's not reducible to some natural fact. It's something else. Now, what is it? It's going to depend on the realist account. And so some realists are going to be some type of Platonist, and they're going to think that that there is a certain sense in which there are moral properties that exist and are like the moral claims made with respect to or that refer to those properties are true, but those moral properties are not part of the natural world. So they exist, they're real, they don't require God, and they're not natural things out in the world. So that would be one view. There are views that try to say, look, there are these objective or stance-independent moral truths, but they don't really require that heavy-duty metaphysics. They're not like, it's not like there's like a fact or property out there that you're like locating with your mind and it's true. They're true in a more, they're like true in virtue of the conceptual components that comprise them. I don't know of a better way to put it than that. So Parfit and Scanlon are a couple philosophers that try to maintain the non-naturalist realism, but sort of strip it of those metaphysical components. You'd have to look at what they have to say about that. So you do have these different sorts of accounts. But generally what I think a lot of them would say is, hey, there's no particularly good reason to think that you need God for these objective moral facts in the first place. So they might point to analogies. They might say, look, you don't need God for like mathematical facts. So the fact that 7 is a prime number, you don't need God for that. And so 7 as a prime number is true. And then, kicking puppies for fun is wrong is also true. And they're true in a very similar respect. So they might say something like that.
I see. I think I kind of get that. Because I think if you strip away any metaphysical connotation whatsoever, in my mind, you're left with just natural rationales. Like, okay, well, if there's nothing metaphysical to it, then it has to come from our brain. Our brain is material. So then I don't see how it would be anti-realist, I guess, because it comes from your very real brain if you believe in those moral facts, right? Am I misunderstanding something there?
Yeah, maybe. You said anti-realist there, and maybe you meant realist. I'm not sure.
Oh, maybe. Probably.
I don't
I'm just
know.
trying to say that if you say that moral facts do exist, but only in the real world without metaphysical, in other words, not because of God, but because of how we evolved, because of our society or whatever, then they exist. They exist. That would be the natural conclusion of that, right? If they're not rooted in metaphysics, then they're rooted in the quote unquote real world that we 3D world that we
well, they wouldn't say that they would be rooted. They probably wouldn't say they'd be rooted in evolution. They might say that there's some sort of like conceptual truth. So just to give you a really like rudimentary idea of like, and this is like the most common example philosophers give, the fact that bachelors are unmarried men, that's like a conceptual fact. It just has to do with the meaning of the terms. It's not, no one like did research where they went out and found a bunch of bachelors and then like they studied them and they're like, wow, none of them are married. So I guess bachelors are unmarried. It's just true in virtue of the relation of like what it means to be a bachelor and what it means to be an unmarried man. They just mean the same thing.
Right.
But the idea would be that that's not discovered through experience.
How is that not discovered through experience?
Well, I'm not a rationalist, so I'm very skeptical of the idea of substantive a priori knowledge. So I might say I think that whole idea is nonsense, because for me, the way I look at that is I just say, look, it's true in virtue of stipulation. It's true because you're saying it's true. It'd be like if I said, I'm going to use this word and this word to mean the same thing. And then I say, hey, here's the truth. These words mean the same thing. Well, what it means for them to mean, like the reason they mean the same thing is because I said that they mean the same thing. And so, I see those sorts of, that sort of conceptual truth to just be a sort of trivial thing about like, hey, I'm stipulating these two labels mean the same thing as one another. But a lot of philosophers think that there are substantive a priori truths, like truths that are not discovered via experience and are true and are not just trivial matters of verbal stipulation. I don't agree with them, but that is a common view.
Oh, okay. I don't think I agree with that either. That's the thing. It's like,
Well, right on. Then you have the correct view. So cool.
okay. Well, that's kind of helpful. I mean, I find the entire subject fascinating. I'm going to continue to try to puzzle this out as I read through this and more, hopefully find some more literature on it that's kind of aimed at the layperson because, again, not a philosopher by trade or anything. But it's interesting to me that it would be seen as a, like you were saying, that there will place people that hold to this in a negative light because it's kind of like, what do you mean? It's, to me, it just seems intuitive that if I feel that something is wrong, it's not going to be wrong in every single case. Or if I feel that something is right, it's not going to be right in every single case just because I say so. You know, or just because X person says so, because there's context to different things. I don't know who said it, but it's the thing about lying about whether or not, you know, there's somebody hiding in your house that you don't want somebody to find out about. Like there's obvious reasons why we shift our morals around depending on the situation. And so therefore, I do find that it's subjective to me, or like I get to call the shots whether or not something is quote unquote morally right. To me, feels like that's how I experience the world. So it's crazy that people would try to be like, no, you're wrong, actually, because God said, or this said, or that said, and that they try to view people that are trying to just reason things out through their own experience as somehow being evil or being wrong. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I was so almost relieved to find out that there was like a whole school of thought behind it. It's like, oh, see, I'm not crazy. There's people that think that you can't kind of reason through to a conclusion that would be considered moral without having to stipulate it with all these other authoritarian views and, you know, all these things that would try to coerce you to believe because of this particular route that it has to be this way, not just because you're intuiting it or because you decide upon it. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I know I'm kind of just babbling.
I think some of it does. Yeah, I mean, look, if you want to, if you're looking to get the alternative perspective, not mine, like one thing you could look at is Mike Humer's book, Ethical Intuitionism. And that really is a book where Humer argues you intuit what the moral truths are. You have intuitions, and those intuitions are accurate. They tell you what the moral facts are. So that's how you access the moral facts. And that's one of the most prominent non-naturalist, secular, moral realist accounts.
I'm putting this down right now. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll look that up. I'm not going to take too much more of your time, but I'll probably join again later down the line. Thank you so much.
Sure. One last thing I'll say about that. So again, it's Mike Humer. That's Huemer. And the book is simply called Ethical Intuitionism. Yep. Humer is also like very prolific in doing video appearances. So you could find Humer all over YouTube talking about his views. Awesome. So yeah, Humer is particularly generous with his time in discussing things with people, debating people, and that sort of thing. So if you plug in Mike Humer moral realism into YouTube, you'll get at least half a dozen videos. So that's a really good way to get the sort of crash course in his views without getting the whole book. Although you could just get the whole book. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thanks so much.
Right. Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care. All right, everybody. I think that is going to close out my first ever guest request stream here on TikTok. Someone did ask whether I'm going to be uploading these on YouTube. This one, I don't think it's not uploaded. I'm not set up to upload it on YouTube. I'm going to need to figure out the best way to do that because, I'm not exactly sure what the best way to get that stuff over on YouTube is. I'm also, at other times when I do these lives, I am also going to be heading over to YouTube because I already have people that follow me and like my stuff over there, and I want to be able to continue to talk to them. I don't want to get stuck only being on TikTok or only being on YouTube. So, I will be migrating over there on occasion. I'm not doing it today because for me, where I'm at, it's almost 9 p.m. and I haven't made dinner yet, so I'm going to have to go do that. But do check me out. I'm Lance Independent over on YouTube, and I have a blog that's also called Lance Independent. So I do a ton of stuff on the blog. It's a pretty active blog. I post kind of in bursts. So sometimes I'll post like 10 things in a week or two. And then other times, maybe not that much. Maybe 3 or 4 posts in a week. And then another week, I don't have anything. But I do try to post there regularly. It's at least every couple of weeks. I did take a hiatus a few months ago, but I'm back. I'm very active on there. So do check out the blog. Do check out the YouTube channel. Those are the main places. I do have some published papers. There'll be more coming down the pipeline, so you'll be seeing some stuff. I'm working on stuff on the psychology of metaethics and a few other papers. So yeah, so cool. Thanks everybody. So I didn't check a whole lot of stuff in the chat. It got a little hectic there towards the end. I did see Amdir was here, so hey, what's up, Amdir? And I see a few other questions there, but I'm just not going to be able to deal with them all now. I got to go make dinner. Thanks everybody. Have a great night. Take care.